But Imani, Gandy, you and I are both recovering from our stints in big law, and I think between the two of us, we've been to a couple of firms. We got a couple of big law firms between us, and you know, and I know that big law is as a destination in terms of jobs is what most law students are trained to want to go after. Either get a job in government, doing public interest work, get a clerkship, or you go to big law. If you don't get one of those three, it's kind of like, oh, you're a lawyer. You still a lawyer. You could. You are a lawyer. Now, I don't mean disrespect. I just say according to the perception of the profession. A lot
Yes.
of, frankly, far many more law students end up graduating, going into very small law firms, or they set up their own shingle. There is nothing wrong with any of that. But big law is sort of put up there as the primary goal. It's one of the things that you're supposed to want. And we have seen how these big law firms over the past several weeks, ever since Donald Trump rose from the crypt and came back into office, they have responded in ways that we were told wouldn't happen. We were told they were going to put up a resistance. We were told they were going to stand for the law. Imani, they folding faster than a cheap house of cards. Like it's amazing what's going on. Help us explain the way that the big law firms are responding to the Donald Trump mandates and what that signals for the future of the legal community.
It doesn't bode well, honestly. I mean, you and I both know that law firms, big law firms, are fundamentally conservative institutions,
Yes.
right? Particularly when it comes to the way they treat Black associates, right? Or even women
If they have
associates,
them.
if they
Right.
even have them, right?
Mhm.
And right now, there are what, four law firms or three law firms out of, however a dozen that have decided to actually file a lawsuit and challenge Trump's executive orders, stripping them of their security clearances, stripping them of the right to enter federal buildings, which courts are in federal buildings. Like you cannot practice law if the
Wow.
government says you can't enter a federal building. And the reason that he is targeting and penalizing these law firms, it's just personal vendetta, right? He's mad at Wilmer Hale for hiring Robert Mueller. He's mad at Perkins Coie for hiring Mark Elias, who no longer even works there and has his own, Mark Elias group where he goes and he files lawsuits challenging voting rights law. He's mad about people who are, I think Jenner and Block is being punished because they are doing pro bono work supporting trans individuals and immigrants. These are all policies of his that he needs to sort of fly through the courts with no opposition. And when you have big law firms who have attorneys that are really, really smart, I mean, these are like attorneys from elite schools, top 10 schools, Yale, Stanford, Harvard, those type of schools. And when they have a pro bono program that allows particularly young associates to get real litigation experience without really affecting the law firm's bottom line, because get real, that's what then these firms aren't doing pro bono work out of the goodness of their heart, really.
Right.
It's mostly because their clients expect a certain level of, I guess, morality, or I don't know. For example, Microsoft and Intel named Perkins Coie like one of the best law firms when it comes to DEI. And the reason why that happened is because Microsoft and Intel had internal DEI policies and they wanted to hire outside counsel that reflected those values. So that's why Perkins Coie is being held up as some, bastion of DEI, not necessarily because Perkins Coie partners want to hire a lot of Black associates, but because they won't be able to get business unless they do. So
And
that's what I mean when I
you're
talk about these firms being fundamentally conservative. And so the fact that some of their clients may be bailing because they can't enter a courtroom or because they have contracts with the government. I mean, Trump is saying, if you have a government contracts and you work with these firms, then I'm going to come after you. So the fact that these firms are folding is not surprising at all because they're about the bottom line, they're about money, they're about power. And quite frankly, once you get to the level of partner, like the people who are making these decisions, they're barely practicing law anymore, right? Like I remember being, a paralegal at Covington and Burling and working with some of these big partners, just going to golf courses and watching them shoot the shit. I mean, that's really what happens when you get to that level. And a lot of people, the sort of lay people don't understand how those firms work. So But it's just a violation of the First Amendment, right? These lawyers have a right to represent who they want. They have a right to petition the government. Individual American citizens have a right to petition the government for redress, which includes hiring lawyers that are going to represent them.
Mm.
So, watching these firms like Paul Weiss, Skadden Arps, Milbank, Wilkie Farr, all these really top 10 firms just caving makes me sad for the legal profession, even though I know the legal profession is, like I said, fundamentally conservative. But more
Right.
importantly, it makes me sad for the minoritized people who have to work there, knowing that the firm that they chose to go and spend at least a couple years of their career after law school really doesn't give a fuck about them.
Right. And frankly, when we're talking about the implications of this, so for those of you who are just tuning in, we're talking about these executive orders that Donald Trump has issued against individual law firms who meet the criteria that Imani just referenced. And I'm sure Perkins Coie at one time was like, we are the diversity, equity, and inclusion champions, according to Microsoft. Little did they know that might be the kiss of death in a Donald Trump administration, because that designation certainly didn't help, along with all the other elements that you mentioned. But one of the challenges that I'm facing, Imani, is looking at the deals that these firms are striking with the administration in advance. I want to break down for everybody what pro bono law work looks like. So for people who are not familiar with big law firms, you go to these law firms, you make more money than Black Jesus. I mean, you just do. You probably make more money than white Jesus too, but you definitely make more money than Black Jesus. And you make your billing hours on behalf of the cases that you're working on. Those cases are money generating cases, revenue generating cases for the law firm, whether it's corporate law where you're doing transactional work, mergers and acquisitions, whatever the case may be, or if you're in the litigation side of the house, there's some space that exists in between depending on what firm you're at. Most reputable law firms have pro bono legal services. And when Imani was talking about the fact that they do this not because they want to, but they provide pro bono legal services or free legal services that their lawyers are essentially volunteering, and I'm putting that in air quotes, but volunteering on, they take these pro bono cases because it makes them look good. And it really is helpful for young lawyers, because I remember when I started out at some of my first firms, I did a lot of pro bono work. It got my litigation skills up. It helped me understand transactional law when I was working as it pertains to nonprofit organizations or groups that wanted to incorporate basic stuff, but that didn't require a law firm partner. Had a law firm partner who was charging at that point, what, $600-700 an hour, something like that. They weren't going to spend their precious time working on that. That was going to be something that I was going to be working on, because I was not billing at $600-700 an hour. I don't know that anybody should ever be billing at $600-700 an hour. But Imani, when it came to striking a deal, these free legal services that these corporations get, they've sometimes gotten people off of death row. We have seen pro bono legal services provide, help to change entire sentencing paradigms in municipalities. We have seen pro bono legal services used for so many good and amazing, wonderful things that you want to see in the law. And when these firms who were scared that they might have an executive order issued against them, when they went hat in hand to prostrate themselves and kiss the knee and lick whatever else, the ring, and lick whatever else they had to do in order to make good with Donald Trump, one of the things they agreed to do, Imani, was to give millions upon millions of dollars in pro bono legal services, not just to Donald Trump, but to issues that he is championing. $40 million for Paul Weiss. And I'm like, Paul Weiss, y'all run the biggest diversity program in the summers of all the firms. Everybody want to be at the Paul Weiss minority. Are y'all going to host it this year? Probably not. $40 million worth of pro bono legal services. Skadden Arps, considered one of the big and the best of the big and the best. $100 million in pro bono legal services, which means, correct me if I'm wrong, that not only is Donald Trump walking away with, nearly, between that and the other firms, at least $140 million worth of free legal services, not just for him, but for his causes. But what that also means is that the causes that those firms might have taken up, like, I don't know, to defend school boards that don't want to give up their diversity, equity, and inclusion programs because of First Amendment and the needs to meet the needs of their children, they would often go to a law firm like a Paul Weiss, like a Skadden Arps, and say, can you help us out by supporting with pro bono legal services? Now, not only are they not going to be able to get it because these firms have strapped themselves to the balls of the president, but they're also now going to be conflicted out from being able to represent those interests in the future, which means you have essentially locked up the legal industries, the big law community's capacity to do good because they are tying themselves to the sweat dripping from that man's orangutanning orange balls. Am I wrong about that? Did I get that
I
wrong?
mean, I have nothing. Even Dexter's upset about that. I have no, yeah, I can't add anything more to that. I mean, that's exactly right. And when you think about it, there is this thing called the quote unquote Chinese wall, and I'm not trying to be racist or whatever, but that's literally what it's
It's
called,
literally
where
what
like
it's
you
called.
can have, the same law firm representing opposite interests as long as you wall the attorneys off. But, they're not going to be, that's when you really want to take one case from one client and you really want to take, these people they're not going to want to help the regular people anymore. I remember I started out my career at Latham and Watkins
Oh
in
yeah,
Los Angeles,
yeah.
right? My first day of work was literally the day before 9/11. So my whole first year of at Latham was marked by watching, junior associates doing Gitmo detainee work. Right? People who
Wow.
were being thrown into Gitmo, they were going to Gitmo, they were interviewing people, they were filing habeas petitions, ring a bell. I mean, that's the sort of thing that Donald Trump wants to prevent from happening now so that there's no one who's going to be able to represent people like Kilmar Abrego Garcia, this El
Mm,
Salvadorian man who's been thrown in the mega prison, the concentration camp in El Salvador. And the Trump administration is saying, well, we can't bring him back because we don't have any, the United States courts don't have any jurisdiction over a foreign sovereign, right? El Salvador. What lawyers are going to want to take those cases, particularly when
mm,
if they, for example, have to travel to El Salvador to meet with their clients, and then they're trying to come back in through immigration, through customs, and they're being stopped and they're having their phones searched and their phones. There was
mm.
a story the other day about I'm not sure what his nationality is, but I know he's a Muslim man, Muslim attorney from Dearborn, Michigan, who was
Yes.
representing one of the University of Michigan protesters who was stopped at the airport and they tried to take his phone. And
Right.
you and I know, like lawyers' phones, that's like privileged stuff in there. You got
Yes.
clients, you got work product. And the man was like, "Man, I'm not giving you my phone." And they tried to harass him and they tried to, sort of strong arm him. And eventually they let him go. But that's the idea that lawyers are being yoked up by customs just for representing people that Donald Trump doesn't like is a
Right.
real concern. And
Right.
particularly when we're in a world where Trump is just ignoring court orders, arguing that he has the right to deport American citizens, which is like, honestly, I don't even want to say deport American citizens because you can't deport
Right.
American citizens. You can only quote unquote, deport people who are not here, legally.
And that's only if you send them back to the country they came from.
The
Otherwise, it's an
country of
abduction.
origin.
I guess it's
Here's
not.
what's gonna here's what's gonna happen, right? With all of the concern about the great replacement theory and the fact that there are too many black and brown people in this country, if they're gonna start human trafficking, right, kidnapping black and brown people and sending them to El Salvador based on nothing,
Wow.
who's gonna stop them? The Supreme Court? Apparently not. I mean, we got a couple of rulings this week that demonstrate that the Supreme Court seems to be on the verge of allowing Donald Trump to use the Alien Enemies Act to call these Venezuelan people invaders as if we're at war. I mean, we're in such dire times and we rely on lawyers to get us through these times. And that's why Trump is attacking lawyers because he knows that they're the people that are hauling him into court. Something to the effect of 130 lawsuits now
Mm.
about his policies.
Yeah.
We're in the bad place.